Today, all eyes, those of the powerful oppressors and those of the hopeful, are fixed on us.
Che's dream is for a united socialist Latin America, a new world order that will not sit well with the United States. To attain it, Che will spread revolution across the continent. But first, more blood will be shed. January 2nd, 1959, Havana, Cuba. After a 2-year hit-and-run war against the forces of Cuban President Fulgencio Batista, a guerrilla force led by Fidel Castro and Che Guevara has now gained control over Cuba. In Havana, it will be Che's job to keep the new revolutionary government in power by targeting and purging any opposition. As Cuban President Fulgencio Batista flees in defeat, Fidel Castro and his rebel army make a triumphant entry into Havana.
We were received as liberators, celebrated. I mean, people ran out with bottles of rum. People went wild.
It was a marvelous experience. I think for the first time in my life we were able to see the people of Cuba united, with one vision, one love, and that it was the most beautiful thing you can see in Cuban history.
After 2 years of living in the mountains, the rebels find the temptations of Havana hard to resist.
Che had to issue stricter orders on the behavior of his young men who, arriving in Havana for the first time, finding all of these beautiful young women, in essence throwing themselves at them. It was, as Leda described it to me, something of an orgy taking place, particularly in the bushes below the great statue of Christ.
Che's wife Hilda had not seen him since the guerrilla campaign began 2 years earlier. She flies to Havana with their daughter, unaware that there is another woman in his life.
And immediately he told her that he was no longer in love with her and he wanted a divorce. Che was married to Leda just a couple of months later in a small ceremony with Raul Castro acting as one of his witnesses.
As Che puts his personal life in order, Fidel Castro begins to implement the first major changes in Cuba.
Well, in the beginning, most of the population was expecting a change. Castro, always when he was in the mountains, he promised free election in 18 months.
There is not communism or Marxism in our ideas. We will not seize any land from anybody.
Yet on February 16th, just 2 months after the rebels' victory, Fidel Castro was sworn in as prime minister, and the elections never take place.
Then certain segments of the professional class and the elite and the middle class began to view Fidel Castro and his regime with suspicion.
There was a debate that started almost from the day Castro took power about whether he was a communist or not. And part of this debate focused on Che Guevara, who obviously did get on the radar screen pretty quickly of the CIA.
Fearing that an alliance with the known communists could jeopardize his position, Fidel Castro keeps Che at a distance.
He ordered Che to take over the La Cabaña fortress, which is an old colonial garrison overlooking Havana Harbor and the city.
That was where the war criminals were tried.
Che orders executions of those found guilty.
In essence, carrying on with what he had been doing in the war. Summary trials for torturers, for men accused of war crimes, and carrying out their firing squad executions in La Cabaña.
The American guerrilla Neil McCauley had spent several months with the rebels and helped train the soldiers. He is approached by the commander of the firing squad on its first round of executions.
I said, look, this is a matter for Cubans. You guys do it. And he said, no, but look, they make a mess of it. We need somebody who's at least going to hit the mark. I was prevailed upon. I didn't mind. I'm glad to shoot these guys. And so I walked out there. I took command of the firing squad. I directed them against him. And this time, killed him. And then the next guy who came up, I took that one too.
Over the next 18 months, hundreds, some say thousands of people are executed by firing squad. The killings helped cement Che's terrifying reputation.
Both of them, they are killers, they are murderers. Castro has killed thousands of people, and Che Guevara has killed thousands of people too. So Che was a devil.
Along with the guilty, some claim that many innocent men are also executed.
That's the reason why a lot of people hate him so much, because he caused so many families to grieve.
Were innocents killed? Possibly. I don't know of any particularly.
What this did, though, is it showed that Fidel meant business. Don't mess with the revolution. Cuba's a dangerous place.
As Che continues with the war tribunals, the same questions in the United States regarding the new regime are being asked across the globe by Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev.
My father asked intelligence, KGB, his political analyst, who are these guys? There was answered that one Central American dictator replaced another Central American dictator. For sure, they're pro-United States, and maybe they're agent of CIA. It was no idea that they can be socialism.
Realizing he has to appease U.S. concerns, Fidel Castro travels to Washington on April 15, 1959.
Military dictator. That is why we are not agree with communism.
He met with Vice President Nixon, claimed famously to the American press that he was not a Marxist, denied it, and said he was a democratic humanist. Fidel, at least in those initial months, kept everyone guessing.
But behind the scenes, Fidel Castro had already aligned with Cuba's Communist Party.
It'll always be an open question whether Fidel became a Marxist himself because of pragmatic opportunity or evolved over time.
There is no doubt Fidel Castro is influenced by Che's ideological convictions.
Che was vital in being a sounding board and an advisor to Fidel during the key years in the Sierra when he built up his role as the revolutionary strongman and also in turning him leftward.
Fidel Castro shares Che's ideology and determination in changing the course of Cuba.
Secretly, he had Che and some of his more radical colleagues meeting and privately drafting the outlines of the future communist state of Cuba.
The government begins to prepare for Cuba's agrarian reform law, which calls for the seizure of private property. But before the plan is implemented, Che is sent overseas.
So to American spies watching Cuba, and even a lot of Cubans, they thought that, Fidel has marginalized Che. He's gotten that radical out of the way.
June 12, 1959. Che leaves Cuba to visit Asia, Africa, and Europe, and makes his first contacts with the Soviet Union. He offers them a deal the U.S. had rejected to buy several million tons of Cuban sugar.
It was the rule of the Cold War, even that you don't think that these people will be your allies or your friends. But if they're trying to do something negative to your enemy, you have to help them.
The Soviets agree to buy what the Americans won't.
They need weapons, so Soviet Union started to sell their old Soviet tanks.